In this video, we are going to learn about interval notation. So we had previously talked about using braces. So remember, braces are these curly things right here. And we use these when we were finding domain and range when we had a graph of just points. But what happens when we have a graph of lines? And so I said that we would eventually be using brackets and parentheses. So brackets are square and parentheses are rounded. And we're going to be using these from this point forward. You will use black brackets when you have closed circles, solid lines, and that's it. So closed circles and solid lines. You'll use parentheses when you have open circles, when you have dashed lines, or when you have positive infinity or negative infinity. And this is going to make more sense to you in a minute as we go through a lot of these examples, but this is so that you know right here when you're using each of these things. So you're using these when you have closed circles or solid lines. And this one over here is open circles and dashed lines, positive infinity and negative infinity. For the infinity symbol, if you're struggling with that, it's just a sideways 8. So you could turn your paper sideways, draw an 8, and then turn your paper back over. Or you could also just put two circles right next to each other like that. But that is the infinity symbol. All right, so for this first one, we have x is greater than 1, and we want to graph this inequality on this number line. So x is greater than 1. Well, 1 would have an open circle because that's not included. And then I want everything that's greater than 1, so I am going to shade to the right. Now remember how I talked about using your arrows. The arrows are going to be super important for us when we're talking about interval notation. So here is the graph of x is greater than 1. You are always going to read these from left to right. You're always reading from left to right. The furthest point to the left is 1. 1 has an open circle. Open circles get a parenthesis, comma, and then my furthest point to the right is an arrow. When you have an arrow, notice how my number line has an arrow going on forever and my shading has an arrow going on forever. This is going to the right forever. It's going to keep going to the right off my screen and keep going forever and ever and ever. So that is going to positive infinity. I know it's going to positive infinity because here my numbers are going up and they're going to keep going up until they get to positive infinity. So positive infinity is where it ends. Infinity always gets a parenthesis. This is my interval notation. That says our solutions start at 1 and they end at infinity. 1 gets a parenthesis because it has an open circle. Infinity gets a parenthesis because we can never get there, right? We can keep counting forever and we will never get to infinity. And so that is why we have a parenthesis here. 1 has a parenthesis because it's not included as a part of the answer. 1 is not in the shaded area, so it's not a solution. So that is why we have our parentheses here. Let's try that again with the next one. Here we have x is less than or equal to negative 5. Well, negative 5 is going to have a closed circle. And then I want all the numbers that are smaller than negative 5, so I would shade to the left. And so here, if my graph keeps going to the left forever, it's going to keep going this way forever and forever and forever. And as it keeps going this way, eventually it's going to get to negative infinity. Whenever you're doing your interval notation, it is always from left to right every time. My furthest point to the left here is my arrow. It's going to keep going to the left forever, so that's going to negative infinity. Negative infinity gets a parenthesis. And you can see that when we wrote that up here. Negative infinity will always get a parenthesis. And then my furthest point to the right is this negative 5. Negative 5 has a closed circle. Closed circles get a bracket. So you can mix your parentheses and your brackets. Negative infinity gets a parenthesis because we can never get to negative infinity. Negative 5 gets a bracket because it's a closed circle. Again, your interval notation is always from left to right. On this next one, we go from negative 1 is less than x is less than or equal to 3. You can break this up into two different inequalities. The first inequality that we have is negative 1 is less than x. I can rewrite that as x is greater than negative 1. My inequality symbol was pointing at the negative 1, and it still is pointing at the negative 1. Negative 1 is going to get an open circle because it's not included. And then when I shade, I'm going to shade to the right. For the other inequality that I have, it starts after the first inequality symbol and goes to the end. So that one is x is less than or equal to 3. 3 is going to get a closed circle because it is included. And then I want all the numbers that are smaller than 3, so I'm going to shade to the left. If we look at these, on negative 1 I'm shading to the right, and on positive 3 I'm shading to the left, and so all I am doing is shading in between here. To write our interval notation, it is always from left to right. My furthest part to the left is negative 1. Negative 1 has an open circle, so that's going to be a parenthesis. My furthest point to the right is 3. 3 has a closed circle, so that's going to have a bracket. Let's try that again with the next one. Here we have x is greater than or equal to 2. 2 is going to have a closed circle because it's equal to. I want all the numbers that are greater than 2, so I am going to shade to the right. When you're writing your interval notation, you're always writing it from left to right. My furthest point to the left is 2. 2 has a closed circle, so that's going to get a bracket. My furthest point to the right is my arrow. My arrow is telling me that this is going to the right forever, so that's headed to positive infinity. Infinity always gets a parenthesis because as long as we keep counting, we will never get to infinity. Because we cannot get there, it is a parenthesis. For the next one, we have x is less than 0. 0 will have an open circle because it's not included. We want all the numbers that are smaller than 0, so we are going to shade to the left. When you write your interval notation, it is always from left to right. My furthest point to the left is an arrow. This is telling me that I'm going to keep going to the left forever. And if I keep counting to the left forever, I'm going to get to negative infinity. So I'm beginning with negative infinity. Negative infinity gets a parenthesis because we can never count to negative infinity. My furthest point to the right is 0. 0 has an open circle, so that will get a parenthesis because 0 is not included. And then on this last example, we have negative 4 is less than x is less than 1. So for our first inequality, we have negative 4 is less than x. I can rewrite that so that it will be x is greater than negative 4. My inequality symbol is pointing at the negative 4, And so it continues to point to the negative 4. Negative 4 is going to have an open circle. And then when I shade this, I'm going to shade to the right because I want all of the numbers that are greater than 4. The other inequality that we have here is x is less than 1. So 1 is going to have an open circle. And when I shade this one, I'm going to shade to the left because I want all the numbers that are smaller than 1. So for negative 4, we're shading to the right. For 1, we're shading to the left. So that means that we are shading in between them. So for my interval notation, you always write it from left to right. My furthest point to the left is negative 4. Negative 4 is an open circle, so that will get a parenthesis. My furthest point to the right is 1. 1 is an open circle, so that will get a parenthesis.